The engineer laughed at the black mechanic. "If you fix that engine, I'll marry you." The cruel taunt cracked through the company warehouse like a gunshot piercing the brittle silence of a tense Monday morning. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, it was worse. It was that dry, restrained kind that festers behind smirks and knowing glances. Rebecca Williams, chief engineer at Precision Automotive in Detroit, held her phone up with a venomous smile that never reached her eyes, recording as she repeated the line. "I'm recording everything, David. When you fail miserably, I want everyone to see what happens when someone tries to take your place." Her words hung in the air like poison, filmed not just for memory, but for mockery. David Jackson, 38 years old, didn't flinch. He had spent more time under the hoods of broken-down cars than Rebecca had spent inside air-conditioned lecture halls. His fingers, thick with calluses and motor grease, had performed quiet miracles long before Precision Automotive ever knew his name. His shop on the South Side didn't have computerized diagnostics or a wall of certifications to impress clients, but it had something their million-dollar department didn't: raw mechanical brilliance. The kind of intuitive genius that couldn't be taught, only earned over years of sweat, loss, and stubborn triumph. The engine on the bench was a prototype electric power unit, cutting-edge, revolutionary, and disastrously broken. It had already swallowed 3 weeks of effort and $200,000 in losses. 5 engineers, each with gleaming degrees and state-of-the-art tools, had thrown up their hands. The technology inside promised to extend electric vehicle range by 60%, a potential goldmine, if anyone could make it work. "You have until Friday," Rebecca announced with icy precision, her voice echoing as a crowd of employees gathered to witness what they believed would be a public failure. 5 days to do what our expert team couldn't do in 3 weeks. And when you fail, I want everyone to understand why some people need to accept their limitations. The setup hadn't been spontaneous. Days earlier, during a heated production meeting, someone had half-jokingly muttered, "Even David from the repair shop could probably fix this faster." The comment, meant to ease the tension, had hit Rebecca like a slap. Her professional facade cracked just enough for fury to seep through. "Bring in this miracle mechanic then," she snapped. "If he can fix what 5 trained specialists couldn't, I'll personally hand him a $200,000 a year contract." It sounded like a challenge, but it was a trap, meticulously designed and publicly staged. David had no degree, no access to internal documentation, no advanced diagnostic rigs, just his hands, his instincts, and a quiet dignity that made people uncomfortable. "Just look at him," Jake, Rebecca's assistant, muttered. "He probably didn't even finish high school, and he wants to compete with real engineers." The smirks spread like an infection. David heard none of it, or pretended not to. His eyes were locked on the prototype, like a surgeon studying a patient no one else could save. There was something in his silence that made even the most smug onlookers shift uneasily. It wasn't desperation. It was the calm of a man who had been underestimated his whole life, and had learned to turn humiliation into fuel. "Pathetic," Rebecca whispered just loud enough as she filmed every second of his supposed downfall. "He doesn't even know where to start." But David stood unmoved, his face unreadable. He had heard every cruel word, every breath of condescension, and still, he stared at that engine like it was telling him secrets in a language only he understood. There, in the heart of the jeering crowd and digital scrutiny, stood a man who looked like he was about to rewrite every assumption that had just been made about him. If you're moved by stories of justice, revenge, and quiet defiance, make sure you subscribe, because this moment right here, it will soon become the biggest mistake Rebecca Williams ever made. The footage spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, Rebecca's smug videos circulated through internal company chats, Slack channels, even private group texts. Laughter erupted in boardrooms and break rooms. "Someone should tell David marriage doesn't come with medical," Mike from sales commented beneath the clip, followed by a flurry of laughing emojis. Another wrote, "Betty couldn't even fix a toaster." The jeering wasn't just professional, it was personal. They weren't just mocking a mechanic. They were mocking a man's worth. David found out about the video not at work, but at home. In the quiet of his modest living room, where he and his daughter Jasmine had rebuilt their lives after his wife died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Jasmine came home from school with her eyes red, trembling with something too big for a 13-year-old to carry. "Dad, my classmates are sharing a video of you on TikTok. They're saying horrible things." David's heart clenched, not from embarrassment, but from the deep, cold anger that had once risen when the hospital doctor had said Linda might have lived if they'd had better insurance, if they'd had access to a private clinic. If. It was always if. He wrapped Jasmine in his arms and whispered, "Don't listen to those people, princess. Some folks only feel tall by stepping on others." But inside, something dark and silent took root. A file in the back of his mind Mark noted. Every cruel word, every smirk, every person who laughed at his daughter's tears. Back at Precision Automotive, Rebecca was basking in what she believed was an early victory. Monday morning's executive meeting began with laughter as she played the now-viral video on the conference room screen. The room erupted. She paused it right at the moment David nodded quietly, accepting the challenge. "Look at that face," she sneered. "Like he really thinks he has a shot." What Rebecca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that David Jackson had already started working, not with diagnostics or manuals or lab simulations, but with intuition, with instinct, with something deeper than tech, a connection to machines that couldn't be measured or bought. She saw a man to humiliate. What stood before her was a storm gathering. "It's almost touching," Rebecca said with an icy smirk. "How some people just can't recognize their own limitations." Her voice echoed off the sleek glass walls of the conference room, drawing a few awkward chuckles, but more than a few uneasy glances. Across from her, Thomas Crawford, CEO of Precision Automotive and a man not easily rattled, watched the recorded video on the projection screen in silence. At 60 years old, Thomas had built his empire the hard way. Sweat, sacrifice, and a keen eye for people. But as he watched the smugness in Rebecca's face and the laughter erupting around her, a discomfort settled over him like a chill. "Rebecca," he said slowly, leaning forward with the gravitas of someone used to having the last word, "don't you think this has gone too far? The man isn't even here to defend himself." "That's exactly why it's educational," Rebecca shot back, her voice sharp with authority, her smile tight and cold. "How many times are we going to waste time and resources on people who are clearly not qualified to be here? This is a lesson for all of us about maintaining standards." Jake, ever eager to ride his superior's coattails, jumped in to reinforce the ridicule. "My cousin's a mechanical engineer from MIT. He says this kind of motor is practically impossible to repair without specialized lab equipment. David probably can't even read the technical schematics." What none of them realized, however, was that David had spent the last 3 days in an obsessive, near-manic state of focus that had nothing to do with credentials or labs. In his small, oil-stained workshop, with its cracked windows and humming fluorescent light, he had built his own war room. Technical manuals borrowed from the public library lay open beside patent filings he'd downloaded for free. Stacked printouts, old textbooks, and circuit blueprints littered the table. But it was his instinct, the sixth sense born from decades of raw experience, that guided his hands. And that instinct had uncovered something far more sinister than a technical malfunction. The engine wasn't simply broken. It had been sabotaged. The damage was deliberate. 3 specific components subtly compromised to simulate a standard system failure. The kind of sabotage that would evade even a trained engineer's eye, but not David's. The symmetry of the breakage, the unnatural torque on a welded connector, the barely perceptible scoring inside a thermal regulator. It didn't add up. Someone inside Precision Automotive had intentionally ruined the prototype. David didn't panic. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply said, "Interesting," and began methodically photographing every detail with his scratched, outdated cell phone. Click, click, click. "Very interesting," he muttered, almost to himself, as he moved to the next component. His mind wasn't just working, it was unraveling a thread. By Tuesday, Rebecca's ego had grown hungry for more. Humiliation wasn't enough. It had to be public humiliation. She created a company-wide WhatsApp group titled Miracle Mechanic Updates. adding every employee from the warehouse floor to senior management. Day 2, she posted. Our hero is probably still trying to figure out where the start button is, faced with tears of joy. Laughter flooded the group chat. Carlos from accounting chimed in. Betty's already given up and hit the bar. Sandra from HR added, or maybe he's realized this isn't the place for people like him. But while Rebecca played puppet master to a circus of cruelty, David was sitting at a corner table in a dimly lit diner across town, across from someone who knew more about Precision's past than she ever would. Samuel Torres, a 70-year-old retired mechanic with hands like sandpaper and eyes like steel, looked over the photos David had taken with quiet intensity. That kind of sabotage, Samuel said, tapping a finger on one of the pictures. That's the signature of someone on the inside. I've seen this before. He paused. 15 years ago, someone was quietly derailing projects to steer funding toward preferred contracts. David leaned in. You know people who still work there? Samuel smiled, a slow, mischievous grin. Son, I know people in places you wouldn't believe. And a few of those people have been waiting for years to figure out who was bleeding the company from the inside. You just gave them a place to start. By Wednesday morning, Rebecca was so confident in her victory that she crossed a line she could never uncross. She authorized a full company memo to be read aloud at the morning operations meeting. Status update. The miracle mechanic has yet to perform any miracle. Maybe he's still Googling how to be an engineer. It drew loud laughs and a round of applause from her followers. The cruelty wasn't subtle anymore. It was orchestrated. But what Rebecca didn't realize, what none of them did, was that David had already pieced together not just how to fix the engine, but how to expose a crime. Because the sabotage wasn't random. It pointed to someone high up, someone with motive, someone with access to the company's future tech roadmap. And David had just sent his findings, not to Rebecca, but to someone she never suspected. Internal audit. And someone else too. A quiet figure in the shadows of the boardroom who still respected the kind of integrity that couldn't be bought. Samuel had made a few calls, and the old gears inside Precision Automotive's walls had begun to turn in David's favor. She couldn't help herself. Rebecca dialed into a local Detroit radio show and unleashed her ego live on air. With that signature blend of arrogance and condescension, she described the situation like a comedy sketch, painting David as nothing more than a street-side mechanic with delusions of grandeur. It's a matter of proper education, she told the host, her voice oozing superiority. Some people just need to accept their natural limitations. She laughed. The host laughed. Callers chimed in with jokes. But what Rebecca didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that one of the people listening with rapt attention was Dr. Angela Morrison, a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Detroit and a renowned consultant in cases of industrial sabotage. Angela didn't laugh. The moment she heard the phrase, unrepairable engine, something clicked. It wasn't just professional curiosity. It was instinct. The kind that comes from years in dark rooms with evidence boards and national security cases. That same afternoon, she drove across town and knocked on the door of a modest garage that smelled of motor oil, rust, and brilliance. David opened it with the cautious eyes of a man who had learned to study people before trusting them. Mr. Jackson, she said, offering her hand. I'm Dr. Angela Morrison. I heard about your situation on the radio, and I'd really like to see that so-called impossible engine. David hesitated. She didn't look like someone coming to mock him. Angela was a black woman in her early 50s, standing tall in jeans and a utility jacket, her eyes sharp and confident, like someone who'd spent her life carving out respect in places that didn't offer it willingly. University professor? David asked, his voice guarded. Angela smiled faintly. Among other things. But today, I'm here as someone who recognizes sabotage when she sees it. David stared at her for a long moment, then silently opened the door wider. For the first time, he let someone else into the private space where truth was being unearthed. While Rebecca continued her online campaign of humiliation, posting cruel memes, sarcastic updates, and racking up approval from her echo chamber of elitism, something extraordinary was forming inside David's workshop. The silence was dense, focused. Every insult was now being meticulously logged, not just in memory, but in digital folders of evidence. Angela took her time. She examined David's photographs, his notes, his careful breakdown of the engine. Her brows furrowed deeper with every page. "This isn't just sabotage," she murmured, running her fingers along one of the dismantled parts. "This is a pattern. I've seen it before." Samuel Torres stood in the corner, arms crossed, nodding grimly. 15 years ago, he said, I started to suspect something like this. Projects that failed for no reason. Parts that shouldn't have cracked, but did." Angela straightened and met David's eyes. Someone at Precision is stealing prototype designs and sabotaging the originals to cover their tracks. And it's not just about hiding theft. It's about targeting people, specifically black engineers and women, to eliminate them from leadership positions. Sabotage disguised as incompetence. Meanwhile, back at Precision, Rebecca was operating with reckless arrogance. She doubled down on her cruelty. Now in full performance mode, she created a public Facebook event titled Wedding of the Century. Engineer and mechanic, scheduled for Friday. The post invited every company employee to attend what she described as a 5-second ceremony of failure. She filmed herself giggling as she showed off a simple white dress in her Instagram story. "Something light," she joked, "because it'll be over fast. I told him it wouldn't work, and boom, done." The comments exploded. "Poor guy. He has no idea what's coming." Jake posted beneath the event flyer. "Someone warn him he can still walk away with some dignity." Another chimed in. David saw it all. Every post, every video, every comment, and he didn't flinch. He simply cataloged them, folders full of screenshots, date-stamped and neatly sorted. Jasmine, now more than just his daughter, had become his digital archivist. She had learned video editing in school and was now helping her father create a timeline. Evidence of defamation, workplace harassment, and racially charged mockery. "Dad, look at this," she said one evening, holding up her phone. "She made a video imitating you at work. It's already got 15,000 views." In the video, Rebecca exaggerated her voice, her gestures, her tone, mocking not just David's skills, but his very identity. The parody leaned into offensive stereotypes with disturbing ease. It wasn't just cruel. It was racist. David didn't yell. He simply looked at the screen and said, "Perfect. Save it. Keep documenting everything." On Thursday, Angela returned with a folder in her hand and a grave look on her face. "David, I need to show you something," she said, laying out the papers on his work table. "I got access to Precision's maintenance records from the last 5 years. A friend in the insurance department owed me a favor." The records were damning. 8 prototypes. 3 years. All failed in nearly identical ways. Each time, the failures had occurred on projects led by either black engineers or women. All showed the same technical sabotage, identical to what David had discovered. "This isn't just about keeping people out of success," Angela said. "It's a system. They promote you, wait for the project to collapse, blame you, and replace you." Samuel leaned over the table. "And guess who always took over the projects after those failures?" His voice was bitter. "The same boys' club laughing at you right now." David nodded, his face calm, unreadable. He turned back to the engine. That night, he worked with the precision of a surgeon. Not to impress, not to prove anything, but to finish what he had started. Not just the engine, but the truth. Every screw tightened, every component replaced, every flaw exposed and documented. He wasn't just fixing a machine. He was preparing a case. A truth bomb no one could bury. Late that night, Jasmine entered with a steaming cup of coffee. Her eyes were tired, but proud. "Are you sure you want to do this, Dad?" she asked softly. "These people are powerful." David looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You remember what your mother used to say? The difference between revenge and justice is that justice keeps others from having to live through what you did." He reached for the next tool. "This isn't about me anymore." And then Friday arrived. Rebecca strutted into Precision's headquarters like it was a red carpet event. Her lipstick matched her bright red blazer. Her heels clicked confidently on the polished floor, and in her hand she carried a high-resolution camera. She had hired a freelance videographer to film the ceremony. Her social media buzzed with excitement. The wedding of the century was trending in company circles. She was ready for her final act of public humiliation. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that this would be the final act of something entirely different. Because David Jackson was walking into that building not as a mechanic with something to prove, but as the man holding the detonator to a truth that would blow the roof off everything Precision Automotive thought it stood for. Guys, in 2 hours, we're going to have some real viral content, Rebecca announced smugly, pacing in her heels like a director ready for curtain call. Her eyes sparkled with cruelty as her voice echoed through the office space. The kind of video that teaches a lesson about knowing your limits. Jake nearly leapt from his seat, eyes wide with anticipation. The WhatsApp group's all set, he grinned. It's going out in real time. This'll be a meme in minutes. Laughter bubbled among the staff, cruel, confident, and sure of a man's downfall. But what none of them realized was that David had already arrived. Across the street from Precision Automotive's headquarters, Angela sat parked discreetly in an old hatchback, armed with a professional DSLR setup borrowed from the university's media department. Her fingers adjusted the zoom, her breathing steady as she framed the warehouse door. Meanwhile, Samuel Torres stood near the company's entrance, dressed like any casual visitor, but holding up his phone as though checking messages. He was filming too, every second of it. Inside, David waited in the shadows of the assembly floor, standing silently next to the engine he'd spent 5 days resurrecting. He wasn't dressed in anything flashy, just clean work clothes and an expression of quiet resolve. In his hand, he held a thick envelope, worn at the edges and sealed with tape. Inside were the photographs, printed email chains, and parts receipts that painted a picture far more damning than any viral joke. It wasn't just about fixing the engine anymore. It was about exposing a truth no one expected him to find. And sometimes, when people with power underestimate those they deem unworthy, they forget one crucial thing. True intelligence doesn't need a diploma to change the rules of the game. At precisely 2 p.m., the Precision Automotive warehouse swelled with spectators. Employees lined the catwalks and filled the aisles. Over 100 people, office staff, executives, factory workers, and even a few important clients had gathered in anticipation of what Rebecca had promised would be an educational moment. The atmosphere crackled with electric curiosity, thick with the scent of machinery oil, coffee, and cruel anticipation. A professional cameraman, hired by Rebecca herself, was already in place, broadcasting the event live on Precision's social media platforms. This was more than a company gathering. It was a public spectacle. Rebecca, dressed in a garish red blazer and holding a ridiculous bouquet of plastic flowers, like she was about to crown a prom king, stood center stage beside the engine. Her face beamed with arrogance, but a closer look revealed something else, an eagerness that bordered on theatrical hysteria. She gestured to the camera, her voice smooth and performative. Everyone, in just a few moments, you're going to witness a valuable lesson about the importance of knowing your limitations, she said, pausing dramatically. David Jackson promised he could fix an engine that 5 certified engineers called impossible. Let's see how that turned out, shall we? Laughter broke across the warehouse. Some snickered awkwardly, others a little too loudly. A few employees shifted uncomfortably in the back, clearly uncertain about the tastefulness of the whole thing. Then the double doors opened, and in walked David. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't sweaty or defensive. He moved with a quiet, measured calm that immediately contrasted with the frenzied, performative energy of those trying to humiliate him. In one hand, he carried a simple metal toolbox. In the other, that thick envelope. His clothes were clean but practical. No suit, no apologies, just purpose. Trailing behind him was Angela, dressed in a university hoodie and jeans, her camera now filming steadily from a shoulder rig. No one noticed her at first. She slipped into the crowd like smoke. "Ah, our groom has arrived." Jake shouted, and laughter burst from the audience. "Where's the suit? You can't marry the engine in dirty overalls." Another wave of laughter, sharper this time. But David didn't flinch. He just walked up to the engine he'd poured his soul into over the past 5 days and set down his toolbox, with a quiet thunk. He stood beside it like a craftsman beside his work, not seeking applause, just waiting to be understood. And for the first time since this entire charade had begun, the warehouse began to quiet. Something had shifted. Something real was about to happen. With deliberate precision, David connected the final set of cables and wiped his hands clean, his movements steady and confident. The tension in the warehouse was thick, the air almost humming with unease. Only the distant, muffled laughter of a few employees pierced the silence. Then David straightened, his voice clear and unwavering as it echoed off the high metal walls. "Before we begin, I'd like everyone to see something interesting I discovered during the repair." Rebecca's brow furrowed. This wasn't part of the humiliation script she'd so carefully arranged. Her plan had been simple: watch him fail, discredit him, and tighten her grip on the company. But now he was speaking with authority, not defeat. David lifted his old cell phone and connected it to a portable projector Angela had quietly lent him. The screen flickered to life on the wall behind him. "This engine didn't fail by accident," David continued, his voice growing stronger. "It was deliberately sabotaged." The first image illuminated the wall, a close-up of internal components damaged with disturbing precision. "Look here," he said, pointing with calm intensity. 3 sensors were purposefully compromised to mimic a natural failure. The pattern is too specific, too clean, to be random. A ripple of uneasy murmuring moved through the crowd. Rebecca stepped forward, forcing a laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're just making excuses for your own incompetence." "Interesting that you mention incompetence," another voice cut in, sharp and authoritative. Angela Morrison stepped into view, holding a thick folder. "Dr. Angela Morrison," she introduced herself, professor of mechanical engineering and a former FBI expert on industrial sabotage. "I've examined the evidence Mr. Jackson collected, and I can confirm this engine was sabotaged using methods I've seen in 8 previous cases, all right here at this company." Rebecca's face went pale. What is going on here?" David didn't pause. Slide after slide appeared behind him, parts marred by unnatural damage, dates, signatures, technical logs. "Every single case," he said, involved sabotage on projects led by either black engineers or women. And every time the projects failed, the leads were demoted or fired. Now ask yourself, who always got promoted after that? At that moment, an older man stepped forward from the crowd. It was Samuel Torres, his weathered face hard with years of experience. 40 years at this company," he said, holding a bundle of documents, "has given me access to a lot of things. Rebecca, you and your inner circle received promotions and bonuses totaling $1.2 million over the past 3 years, always after projects like these conveniently failed." Rebecca's hands trembled. "You can't prove any of this. This is defamation." David turned, and for the first time in 5 days, a small smile touched his face. "I can prove it. Jake, remember that video you made, imitating me in a racist caricature?" Jake looked like he'd been struck. "What you didn't know was that my daughter recorded it before you deleted it." The projection changed again. A crude, mocking video played showing Jake and Rebecca, laughing and mimicking racial stereotypes. Gasps of horror echoed through the warehouse. Several key clients, visibly uncomfortable, began quietly making their way toward the exits. David didn't stop. "And Rebecca, do you remember the cruel posts in the WhatsApp group? The jokes, the private messages about keeping certain types of people in their place? My daughter printed every single one, including your messages, talking about cleaning the company of undesirable elements and how to creatively eliminate diverse competition." The wall behind him now exploded with screenshots, text after text of vile, racist, exclusionary language. The room went completely still. Then another presence emerged silently from the background. Thomas Crawford, the company's director, stood motionless, watching everything unfold with increasing horror. "Rebecca," he said coldly, "in my office." "Now, wait," David interjected. "I'm not finished." He turned to the engine and hit the ignition switch. The machine roared to life, its hum smoother and more powerful than ever before. The sound filled the warehouse, Not only alive, but transformed. "This engine hasn't just been repaired," David declared. "It's been optimized. I've improved its efficiency by 15%, using techniques you don't learn in textbooks. You learn them in the field, through experience. Real experience." Rebecca slumped into a chair, her red blazer now a banner of surrender. Tears streamed down her face, not from remorse, but from pure humiliation. Jake stammered, "We didn't know, David. It was just a joke." "A joke," David repeated, his tone now colder than steel. "You tried to destroy my name. You humiliated my daughter. And you helped maintain a system that suffocates talent based on the color of a person's skin. That's not a joke. That's a crime." Angela stepped forward to the microphone, her voice steady and resolute. "All documentation from this investigation has already been forwarded to the Department of Justice, the State Board of Engineers, and multiple press outlets. Rebecca Williams and Jacob Silva will face criminal charges, sabotage, discrimination, and ethical misconduct." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Rebecca tried to rise, but her legs gave out beneath her. Security guards flanked her now. Her empire of cruelty had collapsed in a single, crushing moment. "Oh," David added as he turned off the engine. "About that marriage proposal, Rebecca. Thank you, but I'll have to decline. I prefer partners who respect me as a human being." As she was escorted out of the warehouse, her face ashen, her career in ruins, her pride in tatters, David remained standing beside the machine he had brought back to life. It was no longer just about fixing a piece of equipment. He had repaired something deeper, something invisible. The belief in justice, in competence, in dignity. Something no degree or corner office could manufacture. Because sometimes, when privileged people forget that talent has no color, they learn in the most brutal way that underestimating someone can be the costliest mistake of their lives. A mistake that doesn't just end careers, it rewrites history. 6 months later, in a sunlit office overlooking downtown Detroit, David Jackson leaned back in his chair. The name on the door read, Vice President, Innovation Division. The Day of Truth, as the employees had come to call it, hadn't just changed his fate. It had changed the company's soul. The plaque on the polished oak door gleamed under the soft office lights. David Jackson, Director of Technological Innovation, Precision Automotive. It was a title earned not through favors or shortcuts, but through unshakable dignity and relentless perseverance. In the months following the humiliating ordeal that once brought him to tears in a dusty garage, the tides had turned swiftly. Thomas Crawford, the new interim CEO, had made swift and uncompromising decisions. Rebecca Williams had been fired for cause and charged with sabotage, racial discrimination, and conspiracy. Jake Silva, once the smug face of mockery, had also been terminated and now sold used cars on commission, drowning in legal debt and public disgrace. As David stood quietly at his office window, watching the factory floor hum with activity below, a quiet smile crossed his face. The irony, he thought, is that they feared I would take their place, but they never imagined I'd build something bigger. Precision Automotive hadn't just offered David a role, they'd invested in a vision. He now led a fully funded department dedicated to inclusive innovation, and his first project, a mentoring initiative pairing seasoned mechanics with freshly graduated engineers, was already being implemented across 5 states. A revolution was underway, not born from vengeance, but from hope. Angela Morrison, once a lone voice in the wilderness, now served as a specialist consultant under David's leadership, tasked with rooting out decades of institutionalized discrimination within the company. Their collaboration had already brought justice and opportunity to professionals long silenced or overlooked. Together, they were righting wrongs not just in policy, but in people's lives. "Dad, did you see this?" Jasmine's voice broke through the silence as she walked in holding her tablet. Now 19, she was studying engineering on a full scholarship, funded by the same company that once tried to silence her father. Her bright eyes lit up with the same fire David saw in her mother years ago. Jasmine had become a well-known digital activist, using her voice to amplify others who had been dismissed or denied. Rebecca tried to post some motivational nonsense on LinkedIn again. She chuckled. But the internet has a memory. Her tone was half amused, half pitying. Rebecca's attempts to rebuild her professional image had fallen flat. The evidence of her past, the videos, the reports, the testimonies, still circulated across social media, permanently staining her name. No reputable engineering firm wanted to risk association with her, not when her legacy had become synonymous with exclusion and disgrace. Just then, Samuel Torres entered the office, a stack of reports in hand. Once another quiet ally in a hostile room, he was now a senior consultant on David's team. Sales of the optimized engine have blown past projections, he reported with a proud grin. 3 competitors already want licensing rights. David nodded, impressed but focused. And Jake, he asked. Samuel's smile turned cold. Tried selling trade secrets to a competitor. Got caught in a sting. Same trap he used to set for others. He's facing federal charges for industrial espionage. David closed his eyes briefly. There was no joy in seeing others fall, only the clarity of poetic justice unfolding exactly as it should. Later that afternoon, David's office phone rang. The voice on the other end was surprisingly familiar. It was the host of the local radio show where Rebecca had once tried to publicly humiliate him. Mr. Jackson, we'd love to have you on the air to talk about your journey and the new industry inclusion initiative you've pioneered. People want to hear your story from you. David agreed, not out of spite, but because he knew his story now belonged to anyone who had ever been underestimated. During the live broadcast, the host eventually asked the inevitable question, "How do you feel about Rebecca Williams now?" David paused, the studio silent. Then, with quiet gravity, he answered, "I don't feel anger. I feel sorry for her. She wasted years feeding her prejudices instead of using her talent to build something meaningful. The real tragedy isn't what she did to me. It's what she did to herself." That evening, back home, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of simmering spices. Jasmine was chopping vegetables, her face aglow in the warm light. "Dad," she said, "there's something I've always wanted to ask. That day in the shed, when everyone laughed at you, did you really know you were going to prove them all wrong?" David walked over and wrapped his daughter in a hug. "Princess," he said, his voice thick with memory, "your mother taught me something before she passed. Dignity isn't about never falling. It's about how you get back up. And sometimes, letting people underestimate you is the greatest advantage you can have." Just then, his phone vibrated on the counter. A new article had been published. Forbes, David Jackson, from neighborhood mechanic to industry revolutionary. The headline was bold, but the subheading hit even harder. How one man turned prejudice into progress. The piece chronicled his journey, not as a victim, but as a builder, a visionary, a leader who had turned humiliation into innovation and exclusion into a legacy of inclusion. 6 months earlier, Rebecca Williams had smirked in a glass studio and told the world that some people needed to know their place. Today, David Jackson had redefined exactly what that place looked like for every underdog in the industry, regardless of race, background, or pedigree. Rebecca had lost her career, her credibility, and her standing. Jake Silva, too, had fallen, ensnared by his own deceit. But David had built something that would outlive them all. He hadn't sought revenge. He had built a revolution, one founded on fairness, powered by resilience, and fueled by belief in those the world tried to overlook. His was a legacy not of destruction, but of creation, proof that dignity is not loud, but enduring. That success doesn't come from silencing others, but from lifting those whose voices were never given a chance. And as the article closed with those final words, sometimes, when the privileged forget that greatness has no color or class, they learn that underestimating someone can turn a victim into a visionary. David Jackson knew this was only the beginning. He wasn't just changing the system. He was rewriting the rules entirely.